Sometimes it can be hard to admit that what you've been in the past is no longer. And sometimes it's hard to admit and tough to admit, especially in sports, that you're not that level of team anymore. You might want to be, you might think you are, but the reality is vastly different. And for the Seahawks, no matter how much they might have wanted to still tell themselves that they were a championship contending team, they were no longer. They are no longer. And you can tell that General Manager John Schneider and head coach Pete Carroll agree. Gone Michael Bennett. Gone Richard Sherman. Trying to trade Earl Thomas. Gone Jimmy Graham. You could tell that this team was at a point where they realized you've done all of this. You trade a second-round pick for Sheldon Richardson. You do all of this to try and load up and win now. And when it doesn't happen, you don't want to maybe totally go into the tank because you got Russell Wilson and you've got some talent still on that team. But you realize you need to majorly retool your roster. And maybe the locker room had gotten a bit toxic. Maybe there were too many other types of influences. Maybe the personalities had gotten too strong, too big. Maybe it's just a simple fact of you get to a point in time and you need to do a little bit of house cleaning. Because personally, I don't know, and I think a lot of people would agree, that this team and organization has truly ever been the same since the Super Bowl and that interception by Malcolm Butler. They just have not been the same. So you get to that point where the Seahawks had to understand that major changes needed to happen. Unfortunately for them, they come into this draft, a team pretty strapped in terms of the salary cap, and then on top of that, not having a pick in round 2 or round 3 because of different trades. So they were in a tough spot. And you knew deep down that they were almost a lock, stock, barrel guarantee to trade back in round 1. In fact, I thought they were going to trade entirely out of round 1. And based off of who they took in round 1, maybe that would have been the better strategy, but maybe the dance partner wasn't there. And we could talk about teams should trade down, teams should trade up, but sometimes teams feel confident about a guy they're taking there. Sometimes the package that comes together just isn't right. Sometimes the other team just doesn't want to trade. You might not have that dance partner. It takes 2 to tango. You can't just trade to yourself. You just can't. Well, when you look at this, it's no surprise again that the Seahawks traded down in round 1. I think that was a guarantee. If there was something you were going to bet on in this draft, was that the Seahawks were probably going to trade down to try and recoup some of what they had previously given away on day 2. What was a massive surprise, though, was the fact that they took Rashaad Penny, the running back from San Diego State, 27th overall, ahead of Sony Michel, ahead of Darius Geis, ahead of Nick Chubb, ahead of all of them. Rashaad Penny ended up being the number 2 running back taken in this draft, and he was a first-round pick. A guy who was a 1-year starter at San Diego State that played in a great system where previously Donnell Pumphrey had a 2,000-yard season at all of 5'7", 175 pounds. And it feels like to me this is another example of the Seahawks vastly overvaluing players that they like. Now, there's nothing wrong with putting a high value on guys, but to me there is also something to understanding the draft process, understanding how other teams value a player, to make sure that you're not shooting way too low and you miss out on every guy you really like because you just horribly misplayed things, or you go way too high, set the bar too high, and you panic and take a guy because you really like him and you're afraid you're going to lose out on him, instead of staying true to your board, instead of understanding better what the process is, what the draft is laying out there. That's kind of what it feels like here. And honestly, the Seahawks have a history of this, of overdrafting guys. James Carpenter, Cedric Obehi, Jermaine Ifedi, Malik McDowell. Now, McDowell was a second-round pick, but he was vastly overdrafted. They have this history of overdrafting guys. Now, granted, they vastly overdrafted Bruce Irvin in 2012, coming out of West Virginia, already in his damn mid-20s, but that worked out. So, I don't want to automatically rag on the Penny pick all the way, because I like the guy a lot. I liked him as a prospect quite a bit. And ultimately, if he gives you a presence back there, not a Marshawn Lynch type of beast mode type of presence, but he becomes your bell cow 3-down back, And even though you have concerns about his lack of desire or ability as a pass blocker, his receiving game actually does need a little work. But those are things you could potentially work on. If he could become that 3-down back, if he could become that featured bell cow back, and he does it at a decently high level, then in a couple of years it won't matter that they took him in round 27 and he wasn't projected to be the second running back taken. He wasn't projected by most to be a first-round pick. It won't matter. But the thing is, you open yourself up to criticism and looking bad when you potentially overdraft these guys because you overvalue them and you don't fully care about how other people view these prospects. And at the end of the day, if you hit and you hit repeatedly, then that is all that matters. But you could be making things much more difficult on yourself than you need to. So I think this is one of these things where people will have legit criticisms about the Seahawks and their draft philosophy, and the pick may very well pan out, and it won't matter. And I think it's fair to talk about the criticism of the approach while still in a couple of years not being surprised when the guy pans out and is a 1,000-plus yard rusher in the league. In terms of the rest of the draft, they still weren't able to get a second-round pick back. That second-round pick that they gave up for Sheldon Richardson on that one-year rental was a complete and total waste. Maybe they felt like they needed to do it, but sometimes you got to look at some of these guys and be like, why are they available, and why should we give up a second-round pick? And if you remember, they gave up Jermaine Kearse in order to get him. Yeah, that was a bad deal, and that has to be factored into the draft grading here. They reached a bit for a running back in round 1, and they didn't have a second-round pick because of a one-year rental who didn't do a whole lot of shit for them. The rest of the draft, Rasheem Green, he's got a bit of injury concerns, but they needed some depth at defensive end. No more Michael Bennett, no more Cliff Averill, so you had to look there at some point in time because pretty much all you had there right now is Frank Clark. Will Dissly, the tight end from Washington, is he going to replace Jimmy Graham? No. Was Jimmy Graham really ever a great fit for what they did in Seattle? No. They tried to, in a way, put a square peg in a round hole. Dissly can block. He's a very good inline blocker. But it didn't feel like that was something that the Seahawks really needed to address here. You can find guys, I think, more easily at the tight end position that can block. You need guys in the NFL today at the tight end position that can get open and catch the damn football and make some plays. I don't know Dissly's that guy. But as we got more into day 3, I felt the Seahawks had a pretty strong performance. Shaquem Griffin is reunited with his brother Shaquille. And they got this kid who I had a top 50 prospect grade on in this draft in round 5. He's going to be a special teams demon. There would be a chance down the road he could be a starter at weak side. It's like a perfect opportunity, perfect system, perfect everything for Shaquem Griffin. It was a great pick by the Seahawks. It was great value for the Seahawks. And it was a perfect fit in terms of style, in terms of system, in terms of culture. Shaquem Griffin just works in Seattle. And I'm so glad that he ended up there. Trey Flowers, the safety from Oklahoma State. You know, this is a guy that worked out pretty well at the Combine. And this organization has a history of finding studs in the defensive backfield in round 5. See Cam Chancellor. See Richard Sherman. Could Trey Flowers be that next guy? Might sound crazy, but who thought Cam Chancellor and Richard Sherman were going to be the guys that they were in the NFL? They got their punter in Michael Dickson so they can clear out some cap space by letting their current punter go. Jamarco Jones at the end of round 5, I thought he was a day 2 type of talent, like mid to late day 2 type of guy. I feel like he's a guy that can in the future play left tackle. Maybe he can stick at right tackle early on, but I thought it was really good value getting Jamarco Jones at the end of round 5. So it's funny talking about approach and giving up a second-round pick for a one-year rental, trading back in round 1 but not recouping that second-round pick and reaching a bit for a running back and questioning that strategy. Then I come to day 3 and I look at the body of work, especially in round 5, and I'm like, that was a pretty damn good draft. And ultimately, like if Rashaad Penny works out, Shaquem Griffin works out, Michael Dickson's your punter for a decade, and Jamarco Jones ends up as a starter on your offensive line in the future, that's 4 guys that contributed. That ends up being a really damn good draft and would hold up as one of the best draft classes in 5 years when we look back compared to everybody else. So we can question the strategy and the philosophy, but it all comes down to the execution. And this could be a draft that we look back on in a few years and say, we were harsh on them, it didn't look that good at the time, but it ended up being a lot better, so what the hell do we know?